So at this juncture, we're going to transition to our panel discussion, and allow me to call upon my panelists to come in front. We're starting with PLO Lumumba. PLO Lumumba is a professor of public law and a renowned Pan-Africanist. He's the immediate former director and chief executive officer of the Kenya School of Law, a former secretary of the Constitution of Kenya Review Commission, and a former director of the defunct Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission, among other responsibilities. Second, I would like to now welcome Dr. Lonzen Rugira. Lonzen holds a PhD from Howard University, Washington, D.C. He studied public policy from the African School Studies Research Program for both his master's and doctorate degrees. He's currently the managing editor of the Pan-African Review magazine and its online media platform, and has been a regular commentator on public affairs for more than a decade. Last but not least, I would like to call upon Dimitri Sissi to also come in front. Dimitri Sissi is a genocide survivor who wrote a book titled Do Not Accept to Die. She's currently working as a researcher and a PhD candidate at the University of Vienna, Austria. She's one of the founding members of Kwibuka31, which is an umbrella of genocide survivors associations, and remain an active member of genocide survivors associations in Rwanda and abroad. Thank you very much, my panelists. So as I highlighted earlier, we are going to start with some observations from our panel. We're going to give them each one 5 to 10 minutes to give reflection on topics, on themes that are mentioned in a moment. And then after that, I'll be asking them questions and they'll be answering them. And then later on, we'll have a Q&A that you'll be able to now participate in. I want to start with Dimitri, who is a genocide survivor. I want you to give us a reflection on, your personal testimony, a survivor's journey through the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, and the lessons for the next generation. Thank you very much.
I will probably say two things. I was 22 years old. I survived in Kigali City, in the church, St. Family Church. But before that day, I will probably inform the public that every survivor has two deaths, very important in his life. One is the death, that day you thought you will be killed, whatever happens. So my death date is 11 April. So that was the day I didn't know how I survived. It's a miracle. And then you also have a liberation or resurrection day. That is the day you met with Inkotanyi, RPF soldiers that were fighting to liberate our country, and the liberators, those who stopped the genocide against the Tutsi. So my resurrection day was June 15. So in between, the horror or the struggle was really tough, and I saw a lot of atrocities. I saw people being killed just in my face. Sometimes they would just run like you're running against the death. Someone is running behind, after you to kill you, and something happens, that person fall down, or a bomb just happen, and that person goes back. So it is, the death was certain, the death was visible and touchable. We smelled it, we touched it, and at the end, we are here to testimony, to say how it happened. And I was thrown in a mortuary in a hospital, because the medical doctor who was seeing me every day was like, why don't you kill that girl? I was very small, 49 kgs, and they said I have a provocative face. It's like, look at her, she looks like Kagame. Look at her, she's a Tutsi. She's, you have to all see how Tutsi look like. So I was put in a gate of that hospital, and every killer, every morning, would pass just in front of me and look at me, and I was like, why don't you actually kill me? Why don't you kill me? The torture was too high. And then that medical doctor was like, this lady, I want to finish with her today. And that was on 17th of April. He just they escorted me to the mortuary and put me in and closed. So for them, it was like she will die by suffocation. Anyway, she's lying up of the top of the bodies that were being collected all over the city. At some point, they would have trucks go in town, collect all the bodies on the streets, bring them, to hide them in the mortuary, because they were thinking we have to hide from the international communities. They are now doing satellite photos, and we are saying the opposite. We are not killing the civilians. So that was a way of bringing them to hide, and then they put me in that mortuary, and for me it was the last day. I knew that one I will die. And then I didn't die, because at some point, one cleaner of the hospital came during the night at 3 a.m. He said he saw them putting me in, and he came back. He couldn't sleep. He was a Hutu. He was a kind Hutu. He came back and took me out of that mortuary. It was around 3 a.m., and he was like, if they see me, they'll kill me as well. So make your way, but make sure you survive. And in that same night, that is actually where I took that title, the title of my book, Do Not Accept to Die. It was an inspiration from that night, because they have tried a lot of ways to kill me, and that every time I would survive. And it was like, this time I think I will not die. So from that moment on, my belief was, you will not die. And then I started telling my people, please don't accept to die, because if you die, I will have to live alone, in this country. From that moment, I was like, I will not die, and I will tell the story. But based on what fact? It was just a miracle that I survived. And the hospital became a killing center. So when we went in the hospital, we thought there would be international safety or security standards or measures that would protect centers like an hospital, that will protect sick people or injured. But it was never the case in Rwanda. So all of that to say, we have to remember our people. We also have to remember what happened to us, but also you have to teach. You have to tell the story. You have to ask our youth, our young generation, that they have to stand up. They have to stand up strong. They have to stand up for their country, for us. Because I'll give you quickly the facts of the genocide. We were only 350,000 of survivors in '94. So now I wonder how many do we still have? There was a lot of wounds. They were sick. Many of women were raped and affected by HIV/AIDS. All others, especially men, were suffering inside. We didn't have psychological enough professionals to help us going through. So I don't know if we even have 100,000, because 31st years is a long period for us. The wounds were too heavy. And when we shared this story, when I wrote the book, it was like I became light. The heavy stories are out, and you feel like, wow, now I can live, now I can breathe. Something very, very heavy left my shoulders. And I wanted to give you some facts of the genocide. It lasted only 100 days, and it is considered as the fastest genocide in history. And we lost around 1,074,017 people that were killed in 100 days. They killed approximately 10,740 every day. And it's just mathematics. 447 people were killed every hour, and 7 people were killed every minute. So you can imagine how it was speedy and fast, and that was in the entire territory of Rwanda. 75% of the Tutsi population where we belonged was killed, and 300 children were killed. So 300,000 children were killed, meaning the future of Rwanda was destroyed. 95,000 children became orphans, And 1/3 of child survivors witnessed the death of his or her parents. 96% of child survivors witnessed rape of their mothers or sisters. And imagine all these people have them in Rwanda. We live together. And 80% of child survivors lost a family member, and 31% of child survivors witnessed rape. Between 250,000 and 500,000 of women and girls were raped, and out of them, 70% were affected by HIV and AIDS. 20,000 children were born out of that rape, and those are now young Rwandans we live with. And 73% of genocide survivors reported still being haunted and traumatized by their experiences. Only 350,000 of Tutsi survived the genocide against the Tutsi. The last one, which is a fact that is very heavy and deep, is if we held a minute of silence for every survivor, every victim, our beautiful Rwanda would be silent for over 2 years. So imagine we are in the dark of 2 years just to try to remember every person killed during the genocide. That actually shows how Rwanda came from very far, it was supposed to be a failed nation. After genocide, probably I would say it was tough, of course. We had to start afresh, and at individual and national level, we had to do a lot. We need to tell our children, we need to tell the young generations how we actually stand up and said, how can we live again? How can we love again? And how can we trust again people? We're happy. At least Tutsis, the plan was to exterminate us, and we were not exterminated. And we saw our friends, families coming from exile, from Uganda, from Tanzania, from DRC, from Burundi, from all over. And it was like asking ourselves, do these people love us? Do these people even understand what is happening? And on the other side, those people need us. We need to show the way. And it's like I will cry the whole night, but in the morning I will smile. I'll take his hand and say, take him and go. This is the former Banque Nationale. This is National Bank. This was a Ministry of Education. Probably have documents in it. And our young generation also have to know how it was to work for food. I myself, I worked for 3 months, and the salary was only kaunga, a maize flour to go and prepare. So this is also very important to tell our kids, our young generation, to not take anything they see today as granted. It can happen again. So the role and the responsibility and the mission is for them to be committed to maintain it. To fight for the country, for its peace, for its stability. And there is nothing better than your nation. You travel the world, but you think Rwanda is me. Rwanda is, we like to tell people, go wherever you want, but be Rwandans. Build Rwanda where you are. So that is the spirit. That is the spirit we inherited from Inkotanyi, who liberated us. And that is the spirit we also inherited from our parents, who never had even a minute to tell us what they went through. And also, that is something we owe to the country for it to preserve and live in security. So I think the other particular thing I can say in my history, in the every survivor's journey, is in Rwanda is different from other genocide. We live with perpetrators, but also we live with our liberators. So the mix of genocide survivors, perpetrators, communities, and the liberators makes it unique. It makes it unique because without justice, without forgiveness and reconciliation and the unity, we couldn't stand strong today after 31 years. So I think I'm still in the time allowed, but I thank you very much for attention, and I welcome any questions after. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Dimitri, for sharing your testimony on how you survived the genocide, and of course giving us an overview about what really happened during the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. Now I'd like to give the floor to Lonzen to give us his insight on the international complicity in the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, and of course focusing on the rising threat of genocide ideology under global indifference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lavi. Distinguished guests, I'm humbled and with deep gratitude to have this opportunity to speak about this topic. And I think that anyone who abhors injustice would feel privileged to speak on this subject. The subject I'm speaking about has two parts, and the first part is international complicity in the genocide against the Tutsi, and the second part is about the rising threat of genocide under global indifference. So, genocide, the post-World War II environment created the consensus about the crime of genocide, the uniqueness of this crime, and how this crime is different from any other crime, and it distinguished it as the highest order of crime, the worst crime that can be committed. Genocide is the worst crime that can be committed. And because of this uniqueness of the crime of genocide, the Genocide Convention came as a means or codification of how to contain, how to prevent any further future genocide following the Holocaust against the Jews. So this uniqueness of the genocide, of the crime of genocide, is such that what makes it the highest order of criminality is that the victims, once targeted, do not have the capacity to escape certain death. And the best way for me to illustrate this is during the genocide against the Tutsi in 1994, a young boy, 7 years old, was facing his killers after the killers had killed the parents and the rest of the siblings, and the young boy, 7 years, told the killers that, "I swear, if you spare me, I will no longer be a Tutsi." If we think about this, we see the fact that this young boy is incapable of escaping the certainty of death, and in the capacity or in the futility of denouncing his being a Tutsi. For instance, if you can conceive this in racial terms, it's like if you are white, imagine a 7-year-old white boy or white girl saying that to the killers, "If you spare me, I'll no longer be white." You can see the futility of that plea. Naturally, the young boy was killed because of the futility of the plea that he could no longer be a Tutsi. So this is the uniqueness of the crime of genocide, its ability to lock in the targeted victims for certainty of extermination. Another aspect that makes genocide a unique crime is such that in the global setting, the people are protected first and foremost by the state under which they are citizens. The state has responsibility to protect the people who are its citizens. In the crime of genocide, it is the state that targets its citizens to eliminate them. So the entity that has the responsibility to protect is the entity that commits the crime. Therefore, the people who are targeted for elimination have no one to help them. They have no one to protect them. They are left for certain death. So the convention, Genocide Convention, invites protection after the collapse of the state's protection. After the state targets the very people it's supposed to protect, the Genocide Convention invites protection towards those people from entities beyond that state. In the genocide against the Tutsi, this invitation was declined. Their international community, which is that entity that ought to protect after the collapse of the state ability, after the state attacks its own people, the international community is supposed to fill that void to protect those who are left for extermination. In 1994, we saw the failure to protect, and in the post-war order, the primary responsibility for this intervention was the United Nations Security Council. And among them, the 5 veto holders, China, Russia, France, United States, and what's the other?
UK.
And the UK. So in 1994, we saw the collapse of the post-Cold War consensus about what should be done. So the idea that never again, the Genocide Convention was crafted to be the instrument to ensure that genocide never happens again. So in 1994, we saw the failure of the instrument of the Genocide Convention to be executed. And we saw the failure of the Security Council to enforce the convention. We saw the failure to protect a people who had no protection, whose protection that was supposed to come from the state had turned upside down, and it was a state that was eliminating them. So they were left to die. Now, certain things happened in 1994. As there was this incitement and information, the head of the United Nations mission in Rwanda at the time, Delea, prior to the genocide, communicated to the UN about the impending genocide. It's the infamous cable that is sent to the UN headquarters detailing about the impending genocide, where what was being planned, where the weapons caches were, who was going to do what. This was months prior to the genocide. The cable was ignored. There was no intervention to prevent the genocide as a result of this warning. And we know from declassified information since that the CIA had informed Washington about the impending genocide in Rwanda. Ignored. And once the genocide began and the television, the RTLM, the infamous propaganda radio in Rwanda that was inciting people to go kill. There was a proposal that this radio station should be crushed, should be put out so that it does not call people to kill. And the United States was approached as the state with the capacity to intervene and put out of function the radio that was inciting the population. And the United States said that it could not do that because putting out of function the radio station would violate freedom of speech. So the failure to intervene to stop the incitement of people to go kill was reduced to, so the freedom to live for the people was subordinated to the freedom of speech of the killers to call others to go kill. And once the genocide was happening, after that indifference, France towards the end of the genocide, the killers have eliminated 1 million people, and they need they're fleeing from the RPA army that was saving people. France intervenes in Rwanda and provides a corridor, escape corridor, to the killers to go to Congo, to Zaire at the time. Zaire, where they go and they reorganize. And so the refugee camps are created, and these refugee camps in Zaire, they are manned or under the control of the killers, the killers that had been provided humanitarian corridor by France under the safe haven that had been provided by the Mobutu government at the time in Congo, in Zaire. Zaire at the time, Congo, Democratic Republic of the Congo today, same country. So they control the refugee camps, they start to organize and start to regroup, to prepare to return to Rwanda so that they may complete the genocide. So this is something that they call the unfinished business that they still have to conduct. So, moreover, at the time, immediately after the genocide, the new government in Kigali has found a destroyed country with lacking the very basic of essentials. No medicine, no water, no electricity, everything. Total collapse, and they have to build afresh. Meanwhile, the genocide survivors who have been abandoned by the international community, it has been indifferent to intervene. It has been incapable of preventing their massacre, their loved ones killed. Now the international community mobilizes humanitarian aid. After mobilizing the humanitarian aid, this humanitarian aid does not go to the genocide survivors in Rwanda. It goes to the killers in Zaire. the priority for humanitarian aid by NGOs and international community was not to the survivors. Humanitarian aid was organized to be sent to the killers in Congo, in Zaire. So here we see the indifference not only to intervene to save lives, but the indifference towards the survivors, the people who had managed to survive against all odds. So there is this attitude towards the survivors, and another element of this attitude or hostility towards the survivors, the ICTR was created, International Court, that was created in Arusha. So at the time of the creation of the International Court, and this anecdote I got from a conference I had attended, where a long-time serving head of Rwanda's diplomacy, then Minister of Foreign Affairs, was asked a question, made a comment about the nature of the court and some of the fundamental problems that had been in the court. So he said that at the time, we believed that the international community had created the court to provide justice to the survivors and to provide accountability so that the killers are held accountable. So he said that, but when you raise questions about the court, we were told by the powers, the powers in the United Security Council, United Nations Security Council, we are told that this court that we are setting up is not aimed to provide justice or accountability. The court we are setting up is aimed so that we are seen to have done something. We know that we need a public opinion to perceive us as having done something after we have abandoned the people to certain death. They've survived, and our concern is not necessarily the accountability and the justice that the survivors are due, but we need, it's an image, it's about perception. We need to appear to have done something. So this was the response towards the official Minister of Foreign Affairs of Rwanda at the time. So in other words, your concerns about accountability and justice, yes, we know they are there and they are valid, but they're not primary in what we are trying to set up. So this is the second element of the indifference towards the survivors. They are left to die. Humanitarian aid is given to the killers, not to them. And the court that is set up to deliver, the court that is set up presumably to deliver justice for them is actually primarily meant for something else. So this is the international indifference that we are talking about. You cannot talk about international indifference without examining almost the deliberate efforts to undermine the mechanisms that have actually been put in place to address the threat of genocide. So the very people who establish the mechanisms are the very people who go to undermine these mechanisms. So this will give us a better understanding of why is the threat of genocide persisting. So this is the second part of my discussion, the rising threat of genocide ideology. Genocide ideology persists because there is this environment of indifference. The environment of indifference exists because there are certain lives that don't seem to matter. So when we say never again, never again, never again, never again for whom? For whom? Against whom is never again? Is it never again? Is it never again for everybody, or is it for some people? So now, one of the lessons, in my view, is that one of the lessons to learn from this global situation with that kind of attitude towards genocide is to try to understand the contours of protection under never again. If you are a potential victim of genocide and you look at these parameters of protection under never again, you ask yourself a question, am I included? And the evidence for someone like me who is a Rwandan, or for any survivor, would be no. I don't feel included. So if the history tells me that I'm not included in the instruments of protection that exist in the global order, what do I do? How do I ensure my survival? If I'm subject to certain death, how do I ensure that I survive? So when we see the rising threat of genocide ideology, and I need to talk about this word, genocide ideology, because I think it is important to talk about it so that we see what kind of threat emanates from it. And this genocide ideology is the idea that for any problem that may exist in society, and in every society there will be problems, the solution for problems in a society is that certain people should be exterminated. So if there are rising prices of bread, these people are the problem. Let's exterminate them and maybe the prices of bread will go down. If the challenges in any problem in society, instead of mobilizing state capacity to address the problem, the solution to scapegoat the capacity to solve the problem is always the extermination of the other group. So the other group is a ready-made solution for state incompetence. So when you hear people talk about the threat they face of threat of genocide ideology, the ideology is the idea. The word ideology is about an idea. So the idea is that if we have problems, we solve them by eliminating people. There is always a group that there's always an air hovering around that group that it exists with this permanent fear of being exterminated, because problems will be there, because that is the nature of life, that society will have problems, and this group must always live in this environment of fear that what is the next problem, and the threat that I'm going to be exterminated is around the corner because there's another problem coming. so that's living without living. So this is the genocide ideology, is that the idea that I exist without existing. I exist with this air around me that I am a solution for incompetence, for failure, that when there's a failure to address challenges in society, I am going to be a solution. My extermination is going to be a solution for those challenges. That's not living. So, and there has been a failure in the international environment, the failure to take this threat seriously. The people who have been victims, of genocide, when they say that there is this genocide ideology, that the threat we are living with, there is this indifference towards appreciating this threat. And I want to conclude with 2 points. The RPF, the attitude, there's this attitude towards the Rwandan Patriotic Front, the governing party in Rwanda. So the RPF, it seems, has been the RPF seems to have committed certain crimes towards the international community, to which the international community will not let up. And crime number 1 is that the RPF, by saving Tutsis, seems to have committed the crime of meant to be African. The role of saving people, the humanitarian role, it seems, is a Western role. The RPF, by saving people, overstepped its responsibility. The moral right to save people was not meant to be an African role, it seems. So by saving people, RPF seems to have committed a major offense that it will never be forgiven for. So in my observation of the interaction of the international community vis-a-vis the attitudes of the international community towards the RPF ever since the genocide, ever since it stopped the genocide, it seems that it will never be forgiven for saving people. It overstepped. It went into the moral realm in which I think Africans are not allowed. The second crime that the RPF seems to have committed is that as a result of this failure of the international community to intervene and save people, the RPF learned a lesson that only it can save its people. Only it cannot rely on anyone else to come and intervene and protect people. It seems to have learned that lesson. And in my view, it is the right lesson to learn from the experience of the indifference. It's like, if I'm outside the parameters of protection, I must protect myself. It seems that the RPF learned this lesson, and it created a state that aims to prevent the recurrence of genocide and to address the challenges in such a way that the way it crafted the state, it crafted the state from an introspective perspective as opposed from a perspective of prescription. So the RPF from inception has rejected prescription. It refuses to be prescribed to solutions. It places a premium on having solutions from introspection. And this idea that it refuses prescriptions is a second crime that the RPF seems to have committed. And as long as the RPF insists on refusing prescriptions, it will continue to be perceived, that hostility with the international community. So the first crime of saving people, playing a role it's not supposed to play, and the crime of introspection and thinking of solutions instead of accepting, instead of being dictated to solution, they go hand in hand. It is doing things not supposed to be doing. Finally, another crime that the RPF seems to be committing towards the international community is that it dares to want to save people elsewhere. So as a result of the experience RPF had with in Rwanda, it created a foreign policy where it will intervene elsewhere to save people if it has the capacity to do so. So in the peacekeeping approach of the Rwandan security forces, wherever they are, the Rwandan forces act differently than the other forces there, and they often put themselves in harm's way. You can verify all this in all the places they are deployed. The Rwandan forces put themselves in harm's way to protect people. Where they are serving in security, in peacekeeping, they primarily protect people's lives, which seems to be at odds with the tradition of the UN peacekeeping. So it tends to protect people, and this is out of the foreign policy of the RPF. Now, when it comes to this audacity to want to save people, it seems to be the RPF seems to be committing another crime. When you look at the DRC, the situation taking place in the Democratic Republic of Congo, all these factors I've mentioned are playing out in the DRC. The threat of genocide is there, as the UN ambassador for genocide has warned. Dr. Wairimu Ndiretu, after traveling to DRC, she sent out a warning about the threat of genocide against the Rwandan-speaking people in Congo. Now, despite that threat, there has been, the big powers have been shielding the DRC government against that threat. It has been shielding against the commission of that threat. So instead of pressuring the DRC government to protect its people, it seems like the threat now, or the threat of sanctions, are placed against those who are trying to prevent the genocide. Now, the Belgian government has been, as of late we have come to know, has been lobbying on behalf of the DRC government and trying to prevent a resolution towards the conflict in the DRC. And so this is a level of international indifference that's playing out in the DRC, that's preserving the status quo in which the threat of genocide remains in that country. So Rwanda's involvement in the DRC, now the question remains that, okay, instead of addressing this threat that has been put out there by the UN, by Ndiretu, Dr. Ndiretu, the question is not whether who is protecting these people under the threat of the genocide And if Rwanda is in the DRC, that it would be there to protect these people. But the concern is not about the threat facing the people, the threat of genocide. It's like, why is Rwanda in the DRC? In my view, this question about why Rwanda is in the DRC is related to the question of where does Rwanda get the audacity to save people? Who gives it the right? Who? So if the UN Commissioner for Genocide puts out a warning about the threat of genocide, and no one intervenes, and this is my concluding point, and there is information that Rwandan forces may be there to prevent the genocide, who gives them the right to do so? So this idea, I think the RPF needs to, this idea that there exist international instruments to intervene, international instruments to prevent genocide. But the idea is that these instruments are not supposed to be enforced or to be executed. So this indifference, responding to address this indifference, seems to be a crime. And because of that, the threat of genocide persists. So brings in question this, never again seems to be impossible for those who see themselves outside the parameters of protection. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lonzen, for giving us that overview on the international community's indifference during the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, and of course the developments that are happening in that regard. I want now to transition to PLO Lumumba. There is something that Lonzen mentioned on Africans intervening being not an African thing, being a crime in itself. If you can give us an overview on African solutions to African problems, and of course, when it comes to strengthening regional and continental responses to genocide prevention. Can it really be an African thing? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me start, Excellency Ambassador, to stand with you 31 years later to commemorate the genocide. And all of us who are present here must note the clarion call. It is remember, unite, and renew. And when we talk about African solutions to African problems in the context of the genocide in Rwanda in 1994, we must always remind ourselves that the so-called international institutions were created without Africa. Number two, when we make certain statements, some of which I will make, the apologists for genocide and other inhuman activities are always quick to remind Africans that that is history and it is in the past. It is not. The problems that we have in Africa today are partly, and I dare say, largely a byproduct of the partition of Africa in 1884 and 1885 in Berlin, Germany. And I want to remind us that when the United Nations Charter came into force in 1945 in San Francisco, Africans were not there. When the Universal Declaration of Human Rights came into force in 1948 in Paris, Africans were not there. And that is why you see the architecture of the so-called international instruments are insensitive to African problems. And I dare say that we must always be reminded that classical colonialism may have died, but neocolonialism is alive and well. It manifests itself in different institutions which are post-colonial. For the British countries, it manifests itself in an organization called the Commonwealth, whose head will always be the British monarch. For former French colonies, it manifests itself in an organization called La Francophonie, based in Paris. For the former Portuguese colonies, it manifests itself in the community of Portuguese-speaking countries. These are uncomfortable truths which the colonialists never want to hear, but we must remind them at all times. That is why when you go to the UN, you will find that all African countries can vote all they want, but it takes a veto vote from France to neutralize all that. A veto vote from the UK to neutralize all that. Until the day that we wake up to that reality, we are going nowhere. And I want to tell the Rwandans that when the genocide took place and the international community was silent, for a period of 31 years, they were laboring under guilt. They now believe that time has healed that guilt. That is why the sanctions are now coming. It is payback time. You made us feel guilty. We must now pay back. That is how the Belgians are so brazen that when they are invited to the Democratic Republic of Congo, they are coming back again. And they were the authors of the problem. They were the ones who were measuring the size of people's noses. That is the reality. And we in the African continent, unfortunately, are also laboring under inferiority complex, which was inculcated into us through the colonial project. We are the only continent in the world that still refers to ourselves as Anglophone, to mean that we are English-speaking. Francophone, to mean that we are French-speaking. Lusophone, to mean that we are Portuguese-speaking. That is how pathetic our attitude towards ourselves is. And I'm suggesting to us that until the day that we mentally liberate ourselves, we are never going to solve our problems. When you tell the Rwandese, the Tutsi in Congo that they are not Congolese, who are they? Who are they? They are Congolese. What made them Congolese was that somebody sat in Berlin and drew a line and created Belgian Congo. When you tell, as Julius Nyerere said, when you are telling them to go, are you also telling them to go with the land? These are the realities. And I want us to remember, we Africans and our friends of goodwill, that the international, so-called international architecture is still psychologically, ideologically, and philosophically arrayed against the continent of Africa. The joy of Europe, unspoken, is an Africa that is disorganized, at war, and that does not function. It is only us who can save ourselves by ensuring that we begin to provide solutions to our own problems. When ICTR in Rwanda was going through the mechanics of trying the perpetrators of the genocide, they were spending money in the billions without solving the problems. It took the administration of the RPF in Rwanda to come up with a gashasha to solve the problem. But we don't see that being reported. No, it is ICTR. Rwanda demonstrated to the world that we can do it ourselves. Right now, we have an organization called the African Union. Its greatest claim to fame is that it is funded externally, funded by European NGOs, funded by European governments, and lately the Chinese. The old English saying is true: he or she who pays the piper calls the tune. As long as we are being funded, we will never be independent. And I'm suggesting that the AU must step up. How can it be that African problems are mediated in Qatar? How can it be that African problems are mediated in Istanbul? How can it be that African problems are mediated in Paris and in Munich? These are the painful questions that we must ask. East African community, as I speak now, is crumbling. There is war in Sudan, war threatened in South Sudan, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Somalia. And yet we hear that when the chips are down, some of our leaders call Macron. How can a slave call a former slave master to tell him or her how to get out of slavery? We are our own source of problems. And the time is now that we in the African continent must ask ourselves what we can do. I'll not belabor the issue. I'll conclude in 3 minutes. We must ask ourselves, what are our institutions doing? How can it be that in the DRC problem, Rwanda starts a process, Nairobi starts a process, we meet in Dar es Salaam, we disagree, the president of Angola withdraws, the Kenyans are talking at cross purposes, the EAC and SADC cannot agree, and one day we see our president sitting in Qatar. How can it be? How can it be? How can it be that the chairman of the AUC, what he does is to issue some sterile pro forma statements and does not send a serious mission into the heart of Kinshasa? How can it be that nobody is condemning the invitation of Belgium, a former colonizer, to come and kill Africans again after King Leopold of the Belgians killed 15 million? How can it be? So, ladies and gentlemen, until the day that we of the African extraction remember that the interest of the conceptual West and other players too is to do what is in their best interest. Today, when you listen to any international media, whether it's Al Jazeera, Al Arabiya, CGTN, Sky TV, TV France, or the BBC, or the CNN, DRC occupies less than 30 minutes, 30 seconds rather. Sometimes even when they are dealing with the weather, there is no weather in Africa. They don't talk about weather in Africa. If you don't define yourself, you'll be defined by others. So in conclusion, what am I suggesting? I'm suggesting that what was experienced in Rwanda should be a lesson to the entire continent of Africa. As we speak now, we know, and my good friend talked about those who are denying genocide. There are people, and I've been at forums where there are people talking about revisiting what happened in Rwanda with a view to concluding what they started. What are we doing about it? What are we doing as regional communities, ESC and SADC, to ensure that we fund our affairs? What are we doing about international justice? Why is it that the ICC does not see Europeans and Americans who have caused deaths in the Middle East, whatever the Middle East is? I've always wondered, why is it Middle East? There is no Northeast or Southeast. Who created it? But the truth is, ICC is created, and somebody has said it is for Africans. That is why you can have a warrant of arrest against anybody else. They'll not be arrested. It's against weak countries. At least Philippines falls in that category. Their former president is there. Can't we have an African body that is functional? There is one in Arusha, but is weak, and Morocco has just withdrawn from it. What are we doing about it? In the area of justice, we must go in the direction of solving our problems. Number 3, what are we doing to ensure that the next generation of Africans are taught about these things? Are we teaching about ESC, about SADC, about ECOWAS, about the Sahel, about the Horn and the Maghreb in our schools? What are we teaching about history in our schools? When we talk about genocide, what is the AU doing about it? Or is about meetings and conferences and workshops and symposia sponsored by European NGOs. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you what you know. Wisdom requires that I do not belabor the issue. The concluding remark is that we Africans must now ensure that we begin to de-emphasize the Berlin boundaries. My good friend, the former foreign minister of Tanzania, Palamagambo Kabudi, at a conference told Tanzanians, tell me, in which African border do we not have the Maasai in Kenya and in Tanzania? Where do we not have the Wahaya in Tanzania and in Kenya? Where do we not have the people, the Wanyamwezi in Mozambique and in other parts of Africa? That is the reality of Africa. We must not give practical meaning to the partition of Africa. We must not give meaning to the British model of colonization, divide and rule. We must not give meaning to the French method of rule of assimilation. We must not give meaning to the Portuguese style of destroying our psyche and building the mulattoes to lord it over others. Fellow Africans and friends of goodwill here, until the day that we wake up and begin to do things ourselves, we are going nowhere. Others are beginning to do it. Go to Asia now, like them or hate them. The Chinese are doing their things. Like them or hate them, the Indonesians are doing their things. Like them or hate them, the Vietnamese are doing their things. Like them or hate them, the Indians are doing their things. Like them or hate them, the Brazilians are doing their things. The time is now for us to do our things. Only then will we be at the dinner table of civilization and humanity, not as waiters, but as diners. God bless you.
Thank you very much for those insightful observations. And indeed, the time is now. I want us now to transition into our panel conversation, in which you'll take part by asking questions after the questions that I'm going to ask them. I want to begin with Dimitri and ask you, you've given us a story about how you survived the genocide and the events that happened during the genocide against the Tutsi. But as a survivor, what has the journey of healing and rebuilding your life been like? And were you able to forgive the people that killed your loved ones? If so, why or how is it possible? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ravi. I think surviving the genocide was in itself a burden. You stand up in the morning, there is nothing to start with, there is nobody, no one to cry with. You know, it's like I'm alone and I have to move on. So I remember the first thing in August 1994, when I went back home, I actually feared, I was scared to go alone. I asked support from some soldiers, they took me. We went, there was a full bush where there was a house, and the first reflection was, they didn't kill all of us, because by chance, I didn't sleep in that house that day. So why did they even decide to destroy the house? You know, it's like if someone survives in this family, she or he will have to start afresh. And by destroying this house, we are removing facts. You know, we are destroying the past of these people, of this family. So we can even deny, we can say, no, we didn't kill them. There was never a house, there was never a life, there was never a family. So that means I decided to move on with the wounds, with the fear, and with uncertainty. You know, it's, where do I start? And it's only when you commit, you decide yourself to move on and to ask for support that you can make it. So I went, we had to find houses where to temporarily live. So I went in with, we collected a lot of orphans and widows left to live with, to start with. And like I said, we used to work for food. And so we bring food on the table. And at some point also, I also had to find a job, the first job, and then earn some money and put back all those kids to school. And the government was actually in rebuilding phase, putting back schools and hospitals and the rule of law, you know, ministries, administration, everything started to work. And as survivors, we also needed to come together as associations to create spaces where we go and cry and, you know, and help each other to heal. But on a personal level, it will never be easy because I still feel, yeah, there is that feeling of guilty. Why did I survive and not my sister, who was, for example, the kindest of the family? Why did I survive and not my young brother, Damas, who was, you know, probably more patriotic and more genius? So that questions keep coming back into your mind. Why did I survive? The second is that fear. You know, we pretend being strong. Actually, from the Rwandan culture, you can ask me, how are you? And I will say, I'm fine, even if my husband passed away yesterday. So we have that tradition of pretending to be good and pretending to be fine. But back home alone, you can spend a night crying. You know, we don't share our sorrow as easily as other communities. So I will go in a city, I will work, I will pretend to be strong, but alone, the fear comes back. You know, it's like if tomorrow never comes, if tomorrow be like the 7th of April, because that 7th of April, we all had plans. I myself had the plans to travel to Kibuye, which is in Western Rwanda, and to visit a family and to spend 3 to 5 days on vacation, revising for my upcoming exams. So that family actually was wiped out. They killed all of them where I was supposed to be. So every night it would be like, if tomorrow doesn't come, And from that spirit, from that philosophy, I learned to maximize my days. Like the things I did even today, I make sure I do a lot of things a day because I'm never sure that tomorrow will come. So that's in itself is a trauma. It's something you live with. You plan, but deep inside, you are not sure if tomorrow will come. So the personal commitment to move and to be successful, I told myself, if I got a chance to live, I have to live a good life, of quality life. I have to love my country because I think that soul, that land of Rwanda, that took, drank our blood, can be forever and at any peace, at any cost, and at any price protected. So that is why I took a lot of patriotism in myself and personal level, grow, move on, love your country, do whatever you can to make it, to rebuild it. Any effort counts. Any small effort from anyone counts to rebuild a peaceful community. So that is how I personally moved on. I went back to school. I have promised my father, because from what I told you, our parents didn't have rights, the privilege to have their rights in Rwanda. So for them it was like, you are Tutsis, you have to go to study, you have to excel. Because before they kill you, at least you can, you can excel. It was never easy for Tutsi in Rwanda to have jobs, to have schools. So from that moment, I promised my dad, don't worry, Papa, I will study, I will excel, I will make it in life. So when I was now alone, I kept it. I was like, now I'll do it for myself, but I also do it in double for my people who were killed, for my siblings who were killed. So that was the spirit to never actually waste time, to work hard, to maximize every rights, every opportunity. So that is why I went back. That is how I went back to school. That's where I actually accepted to get married, because for me it was no sense now. How can I even tell someone I love him? How can I pretend building a family? But it's like fake it until you make it. So I faked it and I made it. I got married, I have 5 children, I went to school, and for me it was like, if I go for bachelor's, no, a bachelor is not enough, because I want to also do for my siblings that were killed without going for that dream. I will go and do 2 masters. I will go and do my PhD. Today I'm in the school with classmates who are 25 years old. They're asking me, why are you here? I said, for me it's like I'm 31st old, because in the genocide I was killed. Now I'm as young as you. Let's go to study. So of course they are more smart, they are more quick, but I have to do it, because for me life goes on, and we need to prove to the killers that we stand strong, to the survivors that we can make it, to the country that it can count on us. So that's actually the mission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now I want to move to Dr. Lonzen. You're currently in the media industry, you're in the media space, and looking back in the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, how did media coverage of the genocide shape international responses, or the lack of it?
There has been inconsistency in the media for the most part. There are certain basic questions that the media has been unable to help the world understand, and because the media, there's always this, if there is political indifference, there's going to be reflected in the media. There's going to be indifference as well. So that political indifference I've talked about is reflected in the media indifference for very basic things. We know that the people who were killed in the genocide, more than 1 million. The census was done, 1,075,000, and since that time, they are still uncovering more deaths. So over 1 million. But the media, since over the past 20, 30 years, they've been talking about 800,000 people and I don't know where they get the numbers from. So that's part of the indifference, number one. Number two, the media has lacked the moral courage to call out the indifference. Just last year, when we had this conference, we talked about the question of the terminology of genocide against the Tutsi, because the victims of the genocides were the Tutsis. Until about 2 years ago, all the countries in the world had acknowledged this terminology about the genocide against the Tutsi, except the UK and the US. And there was UN recognition of, but the UK and the US, they wrote a minority opinion. It's not minority because they are among the most powerful countries in the world, but because numerically they are minority, they objected to the definition. They said, no, we cannot call it genocide against the Tutsi because that will make reconciliation in Rwanda difficult. This is moral confusion. So now, you ask the question, but how come the Holocaust is the Holocaust against the Jews, but it does not bring confusion among the Germans? How come we don't call it the genocide of the Germans? How come it doesn't bring confusion when you say who the victims are? In Germany, the victims are the Jews, and it's the Holocaust against the Jews. It does not bring failure of reconciliation in German when you say designate the survivors. If you designate the targeted group, and calling it genocide requires designating the targeted group. Which was the targeted group? That's how we know it's genocide. So in Rwanda, we cannot say genocide against the Tutsi, because if we say so, it will prevent reconciliation between Hutus and Tutsis. So when you call out this, the media ought to call out this contradiction. They say, okay, why is it that, should we call it the genocide in Germany, genocide against the Germans, the Holocaust of the Germans? No, that would not make sense, because then we don't know who was the targeted group. Okay? But in Rwanda, why is it that, you understand? All these are roles of the so the media is absent, the intellectual community is absent, is unable to push against this, it's denial actually, it's a denial. So it is a denial, it is an attack against the survivors. Because if I'm a survivor and I was targeted for elimination as a Tutsi, but you don't want to acknowledge the identity for which I was targeted, then I'm being attacked all over again. So actually reconciliation, real reconciliation involves acknowledging, so the facts, the clarity around the crime is important to prevent its recurrence. So this failure to acknowledge the facts around the genocide is part of the environment that makes it possible to recur. So instead of, so when these countries are saying that they aim to create reconciliation and prevent recurrence of genocide, they're actually facilitating its recurrence by refusing to, the impunity involved, because then the killers are not going to be identified, you know? Yeah, it's like, then they begin to identify, the killers, what they do, the people who killed, they begin to see this as solidarity with them. So the killers say, okay, these powerful countries don't want to acknowledge the victims, and therefore they are with us. They get the moral identity with the superpowers. So for some time, the two countries persisted in that designation until recently, about a year ago, the UK changed its mind, said, okay, it acknowledges the designation. So now the only country left is the United States in the whole world. Only the United States refuses to identify who the victims were, because in its view, doing so, despite its clarity on the Holocaust, if there is a country that has the most clarity in the world about the Holocaust and who are targeted people, it's the United States. When it comes to Rwanda, the United States has the most confusion about the genocide. Yeah? So it is. Now, all this is related. When you look at that indifference is related to, when you look at these countries that are supposed to give this clarity around the genocide, the countries that were created in the Security Council, that are part of the Security Council. So the killers still roaming in France, in Belgium, in the UK, and the UK, for instance, refuses to send the killers to Rwanda because in their view, Rwanda justice system is not impartial enough. So they cannot send the killers. So the UK refuses to send the killers to Rwanda because it does not trust the partiality of Rwanda's justice system. Now, you ask yourself a question. So, how is the UK better positioned by keeping the killers without facing justice instead of sending them to Rwanda to face justice? How is keeping them, shielding them from accountability more just than the Rwandan justice system? How is that? How is that? How do you refuse to send them to face justice in Rwanda because Rwanda is impartial, but you don't try them? How are you more partial? Right? How are you impartial? How are you impartial by refusing to send the killers to a justice system you conceive to be impartial? How are you being impartial? So, we have the killers in France, in Belgium, in the UK still, and the media is silent. The intellectual community is silent. Civil society is silent. Finally, in this confusion that's taking place, I was talking about the Congo. Why is it that sanctions, after the United Nations chief, Alice Ndiretu, says there's threat of genocide in Congo against the Kinyarwanda-speaking people. Almost a year later, the sanctions are out. But the sanctions, why is it that the DRC government that has failed to protect its people who face genocide, why is it that DRC government is not facing sanctions? Why is it that Belgium is not facing sanctions for facilitating the DRC government that emboldening the DRC government to maintain that threat of genocide against its people? So when you look at this, the global justice system, it's inverted. Rwanda is accused of intervening to contain the threat against genocide and is sanctioned. You understand? And the media, again, is absent. And it's just the environment of indifference that persists. And you wonder, in what kind of moral universe do we exist? Yeah? And these big powers like to pretend that they operate within that moral universe. And when you scrutinize it, just a big scratch on top, you see these contradictions. And everyone else who ought to, at the very minimum, what we can do is to ask these questions. And we can't do too much against the powerful countries, but at least we can maybe make them morally uncomfortable.
Thank you very much. Yes, PLO, earlier you highlighted on African solutions to African problems. And most of these organizations that we have, whether it's the African Union, we had them even during the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. And now I want to ask you, looking back in back then at 1994, what were the key failures of African institutions in preventing or stopping the genocide?
Thank you very much, Chair. African institutions have always been weak. In 1984, we had the Organization of African Unity as the continental body. And its institutions were weak even at that time. You remember when the OAU came into being in 1963, its key agenda was decolonization. After that, very little was done to make the OAU a body that was relevant to the reality in the continent of Africa. The net effect is that the regional bodies that existed at that time, whether it was the East African Community, whether it was ECOWAS or Maghreb or SADC or Sahel, the Sahelian region, were not properly funded. And once again, we were divided. And this is our Achilles heel, that Africa is always divided and does not read from one page. And in 1994, African voices were eloquent in their silence. Had African countries intervened at that time, perhaps what happened would not have happened. So weakness is part of our problem. Number two, we are susceptible to manipulation. And this manipulation comes about because we are easy to divide. We are divided along those linguistic lines of Francophone, of Lusophone, and of course of Anglophone. And number three, we have this bastardized idea of sovereignty. That because we are sovereign, what I think this is something that came about in the early years in 1963, 1964, about non-interference with the affairs of any nation. The very reason why we transited from the OAU from 1999, 2001, and 2002 in Durban, we thought that the African Union would be a different body. Unfortunately, the African Union has not demonstrated that it is any different from the OAU in practice. So, in a nutshell, what one sees is a continent that remains weak, a continent that remains divided. And if you doubt me, see what is happening in West Africa with the coup d'etats in Niger, in Mali, and in Burkina. We now have the ECOWAS being dismantled with a new Sahelian organization. See what is happening in South Africa with what has happened in Mozambique. See what is happening in East Africa and in the Sudan. See what is happening in the Maghreb. So until the day, and this is what I want to conclude with, at one meeting I said that African Union should only call 3 meetings with single agenda item each. Meeting number 1 to ask the question, what is wrong with us? Then we go home and reflect. Meeting number 2, what can we do about it? Then we go home and reflect. Meeting number 3, how will we do it and within what time? Then we go home and start implementing. The American government is currently rather schizophrenic, but in their schizophrenia, there is one thing that they have done which I like. To say that the organization called USAID will never give us money. Good. We have been enjoying manna for too long. In the short to medium term, we will suffer, but it will teach us. Because in Africa, we have no shortage of thieves. And these thieves take money from us and keep them in those very countries. If the thieves were to return even half of the money, we don't need USAID. We don't need GIZ. We don't need SIDA. We don't need NORAD. So we must, as I conclude, make the decision. And the younger people here must do it. I'm part of an organization currently, which is the African People's Union. We mean it to be a shadow organization that is going to tell the AU, stop issuing statements and attending workshops funded by NORAD. Do things. Where are you right now in the Democratic Republic of Congo? Where is EAC apart from holding virtual meetings? Right now, the SADC force has withdrawn. The Angolan president has withdrawn. The Belgians are coming. What are we saying, my brothers and sisters? So, that is the position. I conclude with this. There is an African American whom I believe the younger generation here will go and read about. John Henry Clark. He said that Africans must stop saying black is beautiful, because black beauty without black power is complete nonsense. We must become powerful in addition to our being beautiful. Only then will we be in a position. The ambassador, you are black, you are beautiful, but you must be powerful.
Thank you. Thank you, PLO. Balozi wants to make some contribution in this regard. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Ravi, for another opportunity. It will be very brief because I know this is time, not for me. I had time to make my remarks. But I want to clarify just a few things. Because some of these I interacted with firsthand in my past professional life. Dr. Ronzen spoke about the appellation, the designation, the genocide against the Tutsi. Because that is what makes sense in terms of the Genocide Convention. And it is what is backed by the facts. But there is something in addition. And when I explain, it further exposes the ridiculousness of persisting in calling it otherwise. I was one time working closely with the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. It started operations, I think, effectively in 1996. And in the initial cases that it handled, the line of defense was one. For every accused, it was, there was no genocide in Rwanda, number one. Two, I was not involved because I could not have been involved in something that didn't happen. Maybe there were massacres, there were tribal clashes, but not a genocide. So the first cases that the court handled had a line of defense in that logic. After 6 years of operations, I don't remember the number of cases that the court had handled by then, but it is after 6 years. And you can imagine after 6 years, the court had accumulated a significant body of evidence. It had interacted with thousands of witnesses. There was a motion by the prosecutor for the court to pass a judicial notice. And for the young students, I think some of you are law students, you need to know that. The judicial notice by the prosecutor by the prosecutor's application was for the court to recognize that the genocide happened, number one. The prosecutor was successful in that application. So the legal effect of that was that any subsequent cases would never have a defendant say there was no genocide, because there was already a judicial notice. They would only come to argue whether they were involved or not. So legally speaking, that is a matter settled. It takes a lot of courage to actually argue otherwise, because it's a matter that is simply legally settled by the International Criminal Tribunal, a UN court. So when a member of the UN sits in the same UN that created the same court and passed the judgment to argue against the court decision, you can't come another day and talk about rule-based order, because it is the total opposite. That's one clarification I wanted to make. Another one about the UK cases. I was Prosecutor General of Rwanda when the 60 suspects were uncovered to be in the UK. I was involved to work with the Crown Prosecution Services. And one night, the 60 suspects were arrested in different cities across the UK. So as you know the procedure, the first step in court, and I attended the court sessions at Westminster Court in London, was to establish whether there was actually a prima facie case against those defendants. In all 6 cases, the court in London ruled that prima facie cases was there. There was a case to answer against these people. The second level of pursuit was whether they could be sent to Rwanda to face trial. So it's no longer an issue whether they have a case to answer, according to UK court. That is settled. The question is whether they can stand trial in Rwanda. And we even offered the alternative. If you don't think they can stand fair trial in Rwanda, then let them stand trial in the UK under universal jurisdiction arrangement. That is also not working. How do you define that situation? Up to you. Finally, the question of, you spoke about uniqueness. There was another uniqueness on the UN involvement in Rwanda. Because when the genocide started, Dr. Nonzoni spoke about the early warnings that were ignored, General Dallaire sending cable. I have heard, one of my colleagues told me, my colleagues, a certain ambassador of Rwanda in one country, told me actually, General Dallaire said somewhere, I haven't heard him myself, he said somewhere that one of the responses he got when he sent the cable was that even if it happens, those people are too many. Yeah. So, but the fact is, the uniqueness is when the genocide started, the UN was already in Rwanda. There was a UN peacekeeping force called UNAMIR. So one would have possibly anticipated difficulties when the genocide starts and you have to mobilize a UN force. But that was not the case. It was already there. And it had been there for some time. And when this speed that Dimitri was telling us of the killings, when it was happening, how many people a day, that is when a member of the Security Council moved the Security Council to pass a resolution to withdraw the force. To withdraw it at a time it was needed the most. So they had been there when people could do without them, and they are withdrawing when they are needed the most. And another surprise comes. Towards the end, when genocidaries were clearly being defeated, Security Council passes another resolution to send France. When they are not needed is when they are coming, to help them to escape. The same pattern is happening today in the Security Council, in some of the resolutions they are making, in respect of the geopolitical situation that we are in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I think now I'll ask one question per panelist, and then we'll open the floor to the audience so that you can also take part in this conversation. I want to ask Dimitri, you wrote a book called Do Not Accept to Die, which talks about how you survived the genocide. And I want to ask you, how can survivors and their testimonies help combat genocide, denial, and revisionism across the world?
Thank you, Lavi, for the question. Actually, because we are facing denial all over. It is being transmitted even to the young children. Because you are a perpetrator and you live in France, you want your kids to also grow up having the same spirit, the same ideology. So as a survivor, I think the first responsibility and the mandate is to share the story. We like to say that we are the living graves, if I can call it. Okay, sorry for the words. We are the living graves, but we're also the living testimonies. It requires a lot of courage because that fear is still there. And we are transmitting, unfortunately, to our children. And we also have to do something. We also have to do something to fight against the denial. So throughout the book, Do Not Accept to Die, I explained why the title. It is also a motivation to not accept all what is happening, to not accept the story they are telling on our behalf. So if we don't do it ourselves, they will do it for us, and we are still there, we are still living. In the context of the denial, I see it actually as a big contribution because they say it never happened, I say it happened and I was there. And when putting it on a paper, on a book, it's a way of archives that may be easily transmitted. We all know the Bible. We don't even know who wrote them. People who believe in it say it has been written from these people to these people to these people. So we want our testimonies to be written and to be passed throughout in all the generations. So it is a way of fighting the denial, but also it is a way of immortalizing our people who were killed. We are now in the era of IT, digital world. So if I put my brothers in Google, I put Damas Ndaisawa, and he comes as someone who had a life, who lived in Rwanda, who was killed at 18 years, who dreamed of being a scientist. So it is also a way of making them live. It's not about the numbers. It's also about the faces. It's also putting their names into the world of knowledge, and it's a respect. So it's a respect to them. It's a way of fighting against the denial. We are there. You can't just sit there and say, they were for political reasons. You will say there was never a genocide. But I say, stop, I was there. And then I ask my daughter to say, no, stop, my mom was there. I have no grandparents, uncles and aunties that I will never see, that I will never meet. So it's a way of transmission to young generation, but also requesting them to stand for it, to understand the cause and to stand for it. And from my experience, as when the book came, I, for instance, came here to launch it in February 2023, and I was surprised to see that many Kenyans didn't know about it. And I was, if this is Kenya, a neighbor country, a country I respect very much because they have a good education, they are very smart Kenyans. They are very much on digital, they are very, ahead in communication. If they don't know about the genocide, it means it can also happen here in a village, and people will start hate speech, people will start discrimination, and any Kenyan civilian will stand up and say no, because they just take it for granted. So that is why publishing, having books is not enough. we also need to go away and talk about it. I went to France to present the French version, and in the crowd like this, there was a young man who was buying a lot of books. And then a survivor came to me and said, you know, this is a perpetrator. He's from Cyangugu. Why is he buying the books? And for me, I was like, I'm very happy he's buying. I wish all perpetrators can buy it, because even if he doesn't read, he'll put it on the table, and his children will read it. And the children will go to school in France, in that village of France, and we'll talk about it. And the truth will be known. So it's not about, it's not for only Rwandans. Our stories go global and go for 3 generations. So for perpetrators, for survivors, for all Africans, for all people of goodwill, they have to know that what happened in Rwanda, and I was there, I give my testimonies, can happen in Peru, for instance. And there is a big similarities in the genocide, all phases. When we learn about the Cambodia genocide, or the Armenian, or the Holocaust, we all went through the same. So it's a call for action, but it's also a call for protection. Rwandan said they don't want survivors to be protected. So it's also like we don't have a lot of time left to live. So how are we making our days count? How am I behaving, thinking of my people? What my dad would love me to see in me today? That I'm a good citizen, that I'm responsible, that I preach unity and reconciliation. You asked about forgiveness. I always laugh when I'm asked that question, because despite being a Catholic and being raised as a Christian, I can never say I forgave genocidaire. I never. So I salute people who did it. I'm not yet at that level. I believe in reconciliation in the unit, and I applaud my government with all efforts, but forgiveness must be an individual effort. When I will reach, I hope before I die, I probably forgive. But it has to be a personal effort and journey to which, when I feel ready, I forgive. But as of now, I'm not yet, and I'm not even close to forgive genocidaire. I forgive people who owe me money. I forgive people who said bad things about me, but I am not ready yet to forgive people who went and killed a baby of 1 day. No way. There is no way. I'm not at that level yet. I don't know where the spirit will come and transform me and say, go to the jail and say, oh, you're killers of Kibagabaga. Today, this morning, I'm forgiving you. That one is not yet there. And to conclude your question, it's a call to all survivors to try to put something down and to also go beyond the book and talk about it and be actually proud of being survivors. I have been working for the UN for 10 years and for the World Bank for 20 years. And the first instruction was, don't do politics. And I always sign a paper that I'm not doing politics, but I'm a survivor. And that identity of survivor gives me responsibility to go and talk. And there were like some managers were, how can you separate genocide and the politics? And I was like, I'm only doing it for social reasons, not politics. So it can't be actually separated. I'm not doing politics, but I'm preventing against the genocide for my future and my children's future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dimitri. Now the last one to Lonzen. We've had this popular phrase of never again. It's been adopted, but after a few years, it happened in Rwanda, and we are seeing it happen even elsewhere in the world. What are these concrete steps can we take to ensure that never again truly becomes never again? Briefly, as we conclude. Thank you.
I think, as I have said before, never again is difficult to achieve in an environment of indifference, especially when the indifference is coming from the most powerful. Number one. Number two, the lesson to learn is that you're on your own. You're on your own, and you must provide the measures possible to protect yourself. And regardless of any kind of offense, anyone who may take offense from your effort to protect yourself, I think that is the lesson that anyone should learn. And as I've said before, I think it is the lesson that the RPF learned from its experience. No one will come to save anyone. So provide measures to protect yourself. And if anyone is offended, it's better to be offended than to die.
Thank you very much. Now to you, yes, thank you. Now to you, PLO. What are these lessons that fellow African countries can learn from Rwanda when it comes to post-genocide, the rebuilding, the recovery, and the Rwanda that we have today? What lessons can African countries draw from Rwanda's story? Thank you.
My view is that my colleagues have already talked about the lessons. The ambassador has already talked about the lessons. Therefore, I associate myself with all the things that they have said, and I only say three things. One, resilience. Two, hope and forgiveness. And for the continent of Africa, the time is now for us to organize, not merely by word of mouth. It is easier said than done, but until the day we are organized and are seen to be taking charge of our affairs, we'll always be pawns in the international chessboard. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's give them another round of applause. Thank you. So now we can open the floor to the audience. So if you want to ask a question or make a contribution, you can just raise your hand. The protocols are there. So what you'll do is to just introduce yourself and then ask your question and indicate to who your question is addressed to, and keep it as brief as possible. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Josiane Umuringa. I am a survivor of the genocide against Tutsi, and I had the courage from Dimitri, thank you, to write my book as well, the time you came to launch your book in Nairobi. My question goes to you, Dimitri. My first question goes to you, Dimitri. As you say, as first generation, yes, we have wounds, we have fear that we live within us. My question goes, how we can prevent our second generation of not inherit our wound and our fear, how we can protect them, or how we can transmit the message to the second generation. My second question goes to Professor, and we are trying as first generation to write the book. I'm the author of the book as well, Survive to Forgive. But our youth, our Gen Zs, they are not into reading. How we can encourage them to read our story? Thank you.
Thank you very much for those good questions.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the panelists. My name is Eliseo Rutagambwa. I'm a priest, Jesuit priest, working here in Nairobi. One is the clarification. Dr. Rugira talked about international inaction or failure. I don't believe it was a failure. Because if you look at some of the facts, some of which have been mentioned, there was actually success in active, not in a passive way. Whether it was actually to maintain the representative of the genocidal government in the Security Council, whether it was to withdraw the UN forces, all these were actions by the international community. So we cannot talk about failure, because failure implies that somehow you have a good will, but probably you lack the capacity. So it was not the capacity that was lacking. It was that political goodwill, but which was followed by actions that contributed to the perpetration of genocide. Now, the question goes again to Dr. Rugira. Let's say these Western media are redeemable, because of late we have seen a lot of lies, a lot of partiality, a lot of selective information, so we cannot rely on them. What you, as the African media, are trying to do with the advantage we have today of having social media, having these smartphones where we can communicate and put forth our narrative. The last one goes to Professor Rumumba about the African solidarity. What would it take for Africans to really be in solidarity as we claim? Because in all these situations, whether it is during the genocide in Rwanda, I recall that there was only a few Africans. That was Nyerere, Mandela, and probably Dr. Gambare, who was at the UN at the time. And they were acting as individuals, but we never saw any solidarity from governments from this continent. As a matter of fact, most of those governments were actually harboring the perpetrators. I myself, I was here in '94. I was transiting from Burundi going to Zambia, and I was here at the airport 14 hours, whereas the perpetrators could easily enter into the country. So what do you make of this so-called African solidarity? And what would it take to actually generate it so that you can start taking those steps you mentioned? Thank you.
And he said, we did not have the kind of arms that was being used to threaten us, but we said this is our land, our country. Those who bleed will bleed over it. That's what he said. What point was it driving, and how much help did the Rwandan Patriotic Front receive up until liberation? And the last question, genocide is populism in purified form. What lesson is intended by that statement? It is the same statement that again he mentioned on that very day, and Humura Rwanda.
Thank you so much. My name is Yohane Joseph Ntonya from Pan-African University. I'm from Malawi, by the way. I was invited by my fellow students. My first question goes to her. One of the Rwandese friend I have told me that in Rwanda, now there is no Tutsi or Hutu. So when you are sharing your story, which one are you? Are you a Tutsi or a Rwandese? Another question that follows the same is, when you are sharing your story, I felt bad, and I told myself, if I were a Tutsi, I would fight back. How do you balance the story when you're sharing it to the younger generation so that you don't create a vengeance heart in them? In your speech, you said you are afraid of this genocide reoccurring. So how do you balance when you're sharing your story so that you don't create vengeance spirit in these Rwandese? I don't know the truth or Hutu, but for now I know it's Rwandese. Another question goes to Doctor. I don't know, these international agencies that were approached to help during this tragedy, was there any research that was done or conducted to find out why they gave you a court order? If so, what has been put in place to ensure that in case, God forbid, this happens again, they don't give you court order again? The following question goes to Prof.
Last one.
Yes, it's the last one. Prof, I follow you so much. You give good inspirational speeches, which oftentimes goes to the youth. My question is it still time for us to be thinking or remembering, or is it time for us to take an action? If it is so that we need to take an action, what is it that we must do, and not just to be listening to talks and everything? What is it that you can charge the youth with to take it as an action and a solution towards achieving whatever you preach? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'll start with your question. If you truly follow me, you will know that we have a program called the Healers Program in 46 African countries, including Malawi. And we are telling young people, start from your village. That is where you start. You are not going to change the world by starting from the top. And you can see me after this to join that movement of young people. The fruits of the movement may not be seen in your lifetime. Just make your contribution. And I also want you to read a book written by Desmond Mpilo Tutu, There is No Future Without Forgiveness. I urge you to read it too. And Mpilo says, forgiveness is a tool for the strong, not for the weak. It takes great courage to forgive. Easier said than done. But if it is not difficult, it is not worth doing. My good friend, you ask about what must we do? I believe this generation lives in the best of times, that even without, if it is a pain at all, of reading books, this can be converted into little jingles, which can be circulated through various media. And I believe if it touches the hearts of only a few, that is the contribution that you will make. We may wish to change the world in a very dramatic manner, but history has also taught us that changing human hearts does take effort. Ours is to make our contribution and to ensure that the story is told from generation to generation. Remember, there are people who are evil regardless. But as long as those who want to do good are in the majority, they will be neutralized. That is what we must do going forward. And lastly, Africa must organize. We agonize, but organize. A lady called Wangari Maathai made reference to a little bird called the hummingbird. And he said the hummingbird simply brings a little water when there is fire. That is the contribution that you must make. And lastly, all the young people who are here, I urge you to read a poem written by Khalil Gibran. It is a poem by Khalil Gibran, who is a Lebanese American. It is called Fear. I'll not tell you what it says, but in a nutshell, it tells us, be a part of a larger movement and make a contribution. Don't be a person who does not want to make a contribution, however little. Those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you.
I am the managing editor of Pan-African Review, and the reason we created Pan-African Review was to precisely address that question. What do we do about this environment where it seems that from the perspective of us as Africans, reality is turned upside down. So how do we try to put out an alternative source of information that can articulate our reality, so that even if we're a small source of information, we exist for others who want to get another perspective? So the view is that others may join the movement, and the movement can grow to offer a perspective from our reality, so that is not distorted, so that our existence is not under attack without some kind of response. So we have a responsibility to try to fill that void, and others may be encouraged to create similar platforms, alternatives, or to just make sure that whenever you see an injustice, you do something about it. For us, it's a response. It's a call to that injustice that exists in the media. So there are many injustices that exist. So the question, I think, for all of us is, when you see an injustice, do you step up and fill the void, regardless of which field, which area? Now, the other question I want to add, I don't want to preempt Dimitri, but someone asked an interesting question about whether she's Tutsi or Hutu or Rwandan. And I think, without preempting her, I think this question is relevant to me as well, so I need to answer it. So there is no contradiction between being Tutsi or Rwandan or Hutu. There is no contradiction. Because of Rwanda's experience of genocide, it taught us to subordinate these identities to the identity of citizenship. Because, as I said, genocide happens because a portion of a population is denied citizenship protection when the government is attacking you, because the government attacked people as Tutsis, as Hutus, by dividing people into Hutus, into Tutsis, so that it may attack one group against another and to incite one group to attack. So that experience has taught us the danger of the identity of Hutu or Tutsi, because it's an experience we lived. So now, the common citizenship that we all identify with is Rwandan, and this is what unites us. So, as long as the Tutsi or Hutu identity is subordinate, because it's an identity that separates us, and our experience tells us that this separation has led to our destruction. So the uniting identity of being Rwandan is superior to any other identity. So today, the value is in this uniting identity. So that the identity of being Hutu or Tutsi, there is no contradiction, but its significance in our lives is the same as a man or a woman, identity of a male, identity of a female, identity of a light-skinned person and a dark-skinned person, identity of a tall person. And so if I'm light-skinned and short, there's no contradiction between me being light-skinned and short and being Rwandan. If there's no contradiction between me being Hutu or Tutsi and being Rwandan. Yeah, so the identity that created problems for us, in terms of nation building, it has a destructive value. I hope that helps. I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Lonzen. I think now we can conclude with Dimitri to answer the questions that you've asked her. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I actually go for the young man from Malawi. Yes, we are all Rwandese, and we agree. But today I have another identity. I'm a survivor of the genocide perpetrated against the Tutsi. So for me to be a genocide survivor, it's because I was actually in that group called the Tutsi that was targeted and that was killed. So it doesn't, it would be, if I don't say I was a Tutsi during the genocide, then I will be denying. So we moved from that classification, putting people in ethnic groups and teaching one to hate another one and exterminate it. And now, as a unity and reconciliation approach and programs, we are all Rwandans. We are no longer belonging in any of those ethnic groups with the colonialist traits and features, blah, blah, blah. So we are Rwandans, but during the time of the genocide, I was in a group of Tutsi being targeted by a group of Hutu. So that's a history and you can't change it. So we are now Rwandans. Our kids will never know who was Tutsi, who was Hutu, unless we tell them. And as first generation of survivors, we are committed to make our contribution to build a more peaceful Rwanda. And it's our obligation to even not, we are teaching our children, the young generations in that spirit. The question from Josiane. So I will go by a short story. My brother Donat was killed during the genocide in 1994. He was 32 years old. And it's only after the genocide that we knew that in 1962, when my mom was pregnant of him, they came, the Hutu neighbors came to kill and to beat and, to do whatever they wanted and burn the house. And they took refuge to Remera Anglican Church. They were calling that by that time Mumikwege. So it was an area to be protected. So we only knew that after the genocide in 1994. So sharing the story from our generation to the next generation is actually protecting them. From our parents, they didn't tell us because they are fearing. Like those are kids, they're innocent. If you tell them, they go to school and repeat it, and then they come back to us. Now we are safe. We are in a country that is giving us freedom of speech. That is actually asking us to teach, to talk about it, to share the story, and to be part of the reconciliation process. So it's our mandate and obligation to tell our children and the young generations of Rwandans on how bad and how horrific, how the genocide actually can't be described. We don't have a name to call what happened to us. So we teach them, we educate them as peaceful and responsible citizens, but it is also in our responsibility to know what to tell them, how we guide them. They are innocent, they are young, but what we say, it's what they will keep. If today my daughter is in a college in Virginia State, and someone is coming to say Rwanda is killing in DRC, because she's from, she grew up with me, she knew, she has the message to give, she will go to the direct administration and say, no, this is not true, I'm from Rwanda. The truth is this and this and this. I don't have anything against Congolese. They are my friends. But they are, that story is not true. So it's the way of how we choose deliberately what we give them, and the truth, children will always learn from us, from our action, from our behavior. It's a privilege actually, because we have a country that gives us a space and freedom to say, but it is also in our capacity as parents and as elders to give the right message, and continuously. There is no time. They used to ask me, Mom, tell us what happened. And because I was not yet ready, I would tell them, no, you are too young, you can't understand. But today I can even go in a primary school in France and tell them, because now I'm free to say. And they are not my kids. When they are your kids, your children, your own children, you are like, I'm overprotecting them. I don't want to say the neighbor came and macheted my brother. No. But somehow, sometime they go to school and learn it. They go in Kwibuka Commemoration and learn it. So it's up to us to tell them what we want to say, the right message today, so that they don't learn in a wrong way from others. So that's my message to parents and to elders in the room. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Help me once again to appreciate my panel for such a good discussion that we've had. And thank you too for your kind attention, for even contributing and asking questions. At this time, this brings us, of course, to the end of our program. On 7th of April, we have the commemoration at the UN. You're also invited to come and join us as we commemorate the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. Thank you for your kind attention. Enjoy the rest of the day. God bless you.